Welcome, Raul.
Thank you.
I'm so excited for this podcast.
Of
My
course.
dear friend Raul has been a great support of Endeavor for the past 10 years, but I met him when I joined Endeavor in 2019. So it's been a bit over 4 years now. But he's the senior director at Knight Foundation, and he has a lot to tell us. So I hope you enjoy our conversation. So to get started, can you please give us a bit of your background? I know you're a Miami native, which is a rare species nowadays, and he has his own history of supporting startups as the managing director of Miami Angels. For those of you who don't know that, it's a great organization supporting startups in South Florida,
No.
and also you were the creator of startup Cuba, so you were also an entrepreneur, which is amazing. And I want to hear more about how that journey was, like with
Yeah,
startup Cuba and also with Miami Angels, and how you got into this entrepreneurship world.
totally. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. I feel at home, and it's awesome that we're able to do this at a moment in time where Miami's startup scene has matured and blossomed so beautifully. I remember when you came on board, it was pre-pandemic, pre a lot of things. We had seen momentum. We believed that what was happening was real, and then it's taken off since then. So it's really amazing. So yeah, I'm born and raised in Miami. My grandparents are Cuban and Lebanese. And they emigrated to the United States after the Cuban Revolution, as so many did back in the day. And they ended up settling in Miami. They ended up making a home and a life here. My parents then got married here, and started a family. And growing up, I think you're surrounded by your culture, the food, the language, all that kind of stuff. Our grandparents were very present in our upbringing and raising us. And I never really thought anything about being Cuban because the world I knew as a kid was Cuban American, right? It was like croquetas here and like pan con bistec over there, and like it was just like it was a thing, right? This was the world. And it wasn't until I got to like middle school, high school that I noticed that my relationship with kind of my parents' homeland and kind of the heritage, the motherland, was really different than that of friends who were Colombian or Venezuelan or from El Salvador. They traveled regularly. They had a much more living, dynamic relationship with the country of origin. That was off the table. Nobody in my family had visited Cuba in a very, very long time. Family had come and visited us from the island and then gone back usually, but we never went. And if we went, that would have been a deep kind of violation of trauma and of trust and all these things. When I got to college, I met several other young Cuban Americans that felt the same way, that said, this thing that's taboo is really attractive to 20-year-olds. I want to get to know Cuba. So I actually visited Cuba when I was 20 for the first time. I went on a mission with the Catholic Church. And it was mind-boggling. It confirmed everything I had ever heard about the country of my grandparents. The sky is bluer, the grass is greener. Cubans are one of the most welcoming people you'll ever meet, in spite of all the hardship. And at the same time, it is a tragically painful and hurtful place. The country is in ruins. The humanitarian harm is real. Millions of people, 11 million people in particular, are in deep economic hardship right now. And so I had to live with a tension that those two things are real. And the way I kind of lived and kind of got therapy to work through that tension was through Raíces de Esperanza, Roots of Hope. It was a 501c3 grassroots organization of Cuban American youth across the world, Cuban American and really Cubans in the diaspora in Europe as well, that wanted to support their counterparts on the island in a non-political, non-partisan way. And as we were kind of building this organization, trying to figure out what role we could play, two things stood out. One was that technology was an empowering force, right? It could be used for bad, certainly to repress, but it could also be used for good. And so at Roots of Hope, we started sending down thousands of tablets, iPhones, smartphones, laptops, things that you and I take for granted that up until about 15 years ago were illegal to own on the island. And then as the Cuban government opened up a little bit more to its own people and legalized small businesses, we launched Startup Cuba, which was a program to help entrepreneurs on the island gain the basic kind of skills to start their company and go with it. So we teamed up with FIU and we brought Cuban entrepreneurs here, and they did a summer at FIU. And then went back to the island to grow their businesses. And I fell in love with entrepreneurship at that time. I fell in love with entrepreneurs, the way that entrepreneurs see the world, just fundamentally different. They're more tenacious, more resilient, Some folks might call them crazy. I love crazy. And that really was my first dose of technology and entrepreneurship together as forces for good.
Yeah, and I mean, through entrepreneurship, helping them actually have a decent future, right? Building their
Hopefully.
businesses and helping the economic development in a very complicated environment. So that's a great mission that you started Startup Cuba.
Super complicated. And what I think what comes out of entrepreneurship, Claudia, for me, at least in that context, was agency. Mm-hmm. When you own your own business, not only do you have greater agency over yourself and your life, but you feel a greater sense of duty and responsibility to your community.
Yeah.
And so I think that's deeply tied to what I hope the future of the island looks like and the future of Miami.
Yeah. It's that ripple effect. Also, you inspire other people, you gain confidence, then you want to pay it forward. And it's,
I think that's exactly right. I think it's exactly right. A lot of folks, when I joined Knight in particular, I think a lot of, I don't say the haters, but a lot of the doubters maybe were like, oh, but these are just entrepreneurs who are coming here to take things from us.
Nope.
And I pushed back. I pushed back then. I pushed back today.
Yeah.
I think the spirit of Miami is an incredibly welcoming place. It is literally the front door in many ways to this country.
Yes.
It's where my grandparents found refuge and my parents built a life. And it's where 1,001 other entrepreneurs and families are doing the same thing today 100%. From all parts of the world. The identity of Miami is that of one of folks who are renegades and rebels and nonconformists. They're entrepreneurs. They're building their own companies and in the process, building an incredible city with it.
I agree. This is the land of to dream, right? And to actually have an opportunity. And so many immigrants are coming to the United States, many coming to South Florida to, establish themselves here and grow their companies and have a future. I mean, I am from El Salvador. I came to Miami back and forth during the Civil War in the 80s. So for me, this was a special place for safety. So we all have our reasons, right, why we're here. Yeah. So it's just amazing to see how Miami right now is growing and becoming this thriving ecosystem.
I agree.
So, and then you were also on the investor side through Miami Angels, right? Helping startups. And how was that?
It was awesome.
On the other side.
Nico Berardi, who's who has a venture fund called Animo Ventures here in Miami. He's a dear friend. He and a few other folks in town founded at that time Accelerate Growth Partners, which we then rebranded as Miami Angels, as a syndicate. Right. The idea was really simple. It's like there's good entrepreneurship, good entrepreneurs, good deal flow in Miami, and there's good capital. But the two weren't finding each other easily. Mm-hmm. And there was this radical commitment to high quality, high caliber kind of integrity, if you will. We wanted Miamians who were here to have access to great funding and vice versa. So it was a supply demand thing. At the same time, you're kind of finding both and bringing them together in a marketplace model. We ended up growing that to about 130 family offices and investors in Miami. And scouting for really great companies in South Florida. Nearpod, we share a Nearpod as a portfolio company. Great success story for Miami there, and a few others, I think. And it was amazing because all the doubters, again, a lot of doubters. I don't get it.
But you were early. I mean, back in the day, actually, that was a new thing here, and that's why it
also felt obvious, though. It also felt natural that this would be what Miami would do, right?
Yeah, but you had the vision. Not everybody has the vision.
Maybe. I think Nico had it. I think a lot of folks saw it. I think Knight had it. I think Endeavor had it. I think a lot of folks saw what could be, right? Because of the makeup of the place. Yeah. And Miami Angels today continues to go strong in bringing together really good capital with really good entrepreneurs.
I agree with you. And here we are.
Yeah.
And so tell us a bit about Knight Foundation. It's a Miami-based nonprofit, but it's had so much positive impact in this community. And I just think that without Knight, this would look very different. So
I appreciate that, and I believe that too. And so Knight Foundation, for folks who may not be aware, Knight Foundation is a private American foundation, U.S.-based foundation in the classic sense. There's a corpus that the foundation manages, so half of the house invests that wealth, and the other half of the house puts it out into community. The foundation is national in scope, so we invest in informed communities and engaged communities across the country. In particular, we have 26 cities where the Knight brothers once published a newspaper, and those are communities where the brothers asked that their wealth be reinvested in terms of social
Yeah.
good. Miami is
Paying it
headquarters,
forward.
paying it forward. Miami is headquarters. It's where they ran their business out of, and it's where we have the foundation headquarters today. And I have had the privilege for the past 6 years to lead our work in Miami, our community program in Miami, which is focused primarily on tech entrepreneurship,
Hmm.
on building up the city's capacity to attract, retain, develop amazing talent that builds incredible companies.
And I know that you have been doubling on building that tech talent for the future, right? And for now and the future,
Yep.
especially so that all these companies and tech companies can actually hire locally, which is very important for everyone, right? Versus us losing that talent to other cities. So, can you talk about the long term hope and vision for the community and doubling on these efforts?
Yeah, so a few years ago, was it right after I started? I think we started pulling some data, right? And what we saw was that enrollment in computer science programs and related programs at universities, so data science, IT, that kind of stuff, enrollment in those programs was starting to pick up pace. So we were growing by high single digits, low double digits, and low teens. And we looked at that trend for a bit, and we started poking around. And what we realized was that Miamians want to be in tech. Miamians are choosing by their own accord to seek out skills to have a career in tech. It wasn't that any university was offering buy one, get one free
Mm.
degree. It wasn't any sort of gimmicky thing. It was an authentic kind of movement of community. And we believed that was an opportunity for us. It was an opportunity to evolve what we had been doing in Miami around tech entrepreneurship for some time. A thriving tech sector, tech economy just needs exceptional talent.
Yeah.
We believe we have that talent here, but not everybody either identified that they could be in that space, that tech was for them, or they didn't know what pathway to follow to get into tech. And so we've invested in the past 2 years, we've invested about $24 million into expanding the city's tech pipelines,
Mhm.
investments at FIU, Miami-Dade College, and then in programs like CodePath that work within universities to help folks who normally wouldn't be in tech get into tech. And the hope ultimately is that that's the systems change that in X years' time leads to wealth creation,
Yeah.
leads to a more engaged Miami, leads to a more participatory Miami. I think it's true today much more than it was 5 years ago, and I hope it's more true in 5 years than it is today. That nobody says that they have to leave Miami to have a career in tech. That you can either launch a company from here or have a meaningful, purposeful tech career here without feeling like you're being penalized.
I agree. And we're also seeing some entrepreneurs that we talk to that want to hire locally. Actually, they're very intentionally hiring locally. And so it's great that you're also supporting the
I
universities
love
in
it.
this. Hopefully, more uh, not output, but more students graduating from local universities, getting great jobs in tech companies in South Florida.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're all aspire for,
Yeah.
that the companies can grow, but also at the same time have a positive impact in these people's lives, that they don't
Yeah.
have to migrate elsewhere. And I know that, I don't know if people know about this, but I didn't know that Raul is a Florida CPA. So I want to know how you went from CPA and Masters in Science and Taxation from University of Miami to pursue completely different career.
My parents want to know too. They're still asking. Um, Listen, so my mom's an architect, and growing up, I loved that space. Actually, when I got to college, I went to I got in, or I started off in the School of Architecture,
Oh.
and then very, very, very quickly, like instantly, basically realized that wasn't the path I was going to take. I think I'm conflicted. I'm torn between kind of right brain, left brain. And the bet I made with myself, right, the deal I made with myself, and to some extent with my parents, was that I would pick up a skill that was useful. And for me, that was accounting and finance, right? Not only did it come kind of naturally to me, but I could apply that in any sector, in any industry. So if I want to go into entertainment, if I want to go into oil and gas, if I want to go into banking, like that's a good skill to have. It's like learning another language, right? And so I did that, and I went to work at one of the big four here in town. I went to work at EY, had a great experience kind of working with clients throughout the Americas. But I knew that that wasn't for me long term, right? I knew that I wasn't on the so-called partner track. I knew that it was a great formative experience in my early years
Mm-hmm.
to give me a good foundation. I use all that training still today, whether it's in angel investing or in the grant making we do at Knight Foundation. I use all of that today,
Yeah.
and it helps kind of balance me out even more, right? I can lean on that when I need to on the analytical side, and then when I get creative, it's a good counterbalance.
It's so interesting you just said that, because I almost went into architecture.
No way.
My father's a civil engineer. My mom is a graphic designer, and they. I thought the step was for me to be an architect or to get into that space, and I loved numbers, and so I'm like, let me go into finance. So we kind of
Same
did
thing.
more or less
Yeah.
the same.
100%.
But the creative brain is there.
Totally.
So it's that balance between, you know, the creativity, the left and the right brain.
Yeah.
So I completely
Which I think
understand
for
it.
me, actually, like working with entrepreneurs and in that space was then really like a homecoming was really natural. Entrepreneurs have to be able to do both. You have to
Yeah.
be able to think about the kinds of products that will delight your customer and kind of blow something up and be creative in that way, build something, design something, create something. You also got to know that the numbers work, right? If not, it's just a hobby.
Correct.
If not, it's a cute thing. It's not a business.
It's actually good to have those skills.
100%.
So
I agree.
So then, was there a time in your life that you said, I want to be an entrepreneur? Someone inspired you, you really admired that was an entrepreneur, that worked with entrepreneurs, that actually gave you that strength to go and build Startup Cuba and then work Miami Angels and then Night Foundation? Like, is there anything that we could hear?
I think I've been really, really fortunate and blessed. I've been surrounded by folks who have given me opportunities and experiences and also just being role models, right? Modeling what could be. That when for example Cuba was opening up, it was just natural to us, right? I think we all have different motivators. I really hate to lose. I hate losing.
You're competitive.
One of the things I hate even more though is like leaving opportunity on the table and not making the most of the moment. And what I and several friends and colleagues at Roots of Hope noticed was like, why is it that like 99% of the travel providers to Cuba are not just making bank, but they actually don't care about the Cuban people, right? They're sending Americans and or tourists to the beaches of Cuba. They'll live a beautiful week
in a bubble,
completely away from the actual place.
Correct.
And said the only way we're going to kind of do anything about it is by getting in the game. And so we stood up a travel agency called Discover Cuba. And it was about taking people off the beaten path. And so you wouldn't stay at a hotel, you'd stay at an Airbnb. And we'd program your schedule so that it was a local that was taking you around.
Amazing.
But that was, I think if you want to change the system or you want to change the outcomes, you got to get in the game, right? We can either tweet about it or we can kind of be on panels about it and all that kind of stuff. Or we can actually do it. And so we stood up this agency because there really was no other choice to kind of effectuate the change we wanted to see.
Yeah. And that's the best way to really learn about place culture, the people, how they live. You actually create empathy. You feel, right, their emotions, you understand and you connect. And then there's where ideas spark in your head, how you want to pay it forward or help in some way and tell the story in the real story, not the one that is
more complete story, a fuller, more complete story.
It's okay if you just want to go and relax.
I get it. I just want to go and relax.
Hotel.
I just want to go and relax. Trust me. I get it. But we want to give folks a more complete story, a more complete picture of a place.
Okay, excellent. And so we know that you're also passionate about education and everything that you've been doing through Knight Foundation. But tell us about the efforts on improving STEM education in South Florida. I know you talk a lot about that, but I want to hear.
Yeah, that's really been where the work in our community program in Miami has evolved to, tech talent development through systems change, through systems ultimately. Between Florida International University, which is the R1 public university in town, the University of Miami and Miami-Dade College, you cover the super majority of bachelor's degrees in the region. FIU and Miami-Dade College alone account for a huge majority of that. And so if we want to shift the market, ultimately, if you want to shift the system and the output at scale, well, you got to work through the systems that are here. And the beautiful thing about FIU and MDC is that these are organizations, they're institutions that are very young, so they're still malleable, but they have a very, very high NPS, a very high trust quotient with most Miamians. I think you're hard pressed to find a Miamian who doesn't have a friend or a family member who either went to MDC or FIU. Right. It really is the manifestation of the American dream, that you could invest in yourself, in your education, and progress, right, and move forward. And so FIU and Miami-Dade College resonate with this community. So it wasn't a surprise to us that when Miamians were saying, we want to get into tech and get degrees in tech and computer science or data science, or it was like that. We saw that enrollment happening at those institutions. And so that's kind of what animated it originally, this idea that Miamians are seeking this out. Knight Foundation's view on social investment is that with the resources we're deploying into communities, we're going to have a lot more impact if we accelerate organic trends rather than try to create something from scratch. So in that way, I think we're much more market takers than we are market makers. Here we saw an amazing trend. We believed it was authentic and organic, and we said, you need rocket fuel, right? And so our investments across these universities have been to kind of help build the supply to meet demand. You've got this overwhelming kind of demand coming from consumers, from students who want to study and growing. But it's hard. Universities in particular are notorious for being cruise ships, right? It takes a while to turn. And so we are so fortunate to count on the leadership of both universities. President Pumariega at Miami-Dade College is a visionary and transformative leader, as are Dr. Jessel and Dr. Behar at FIU. And so we're just incredibly fortunate as a community that we've got those leaders at those institutions at this moment in time. That is the right combination, and we got lucky. And so the hope, to your question earlier about like what's the hope in the next number of years, the hope is that you have a ton of Miamians able to access high quality education in a cost effective way. And you're mentioning outcomes. Like that's something that we struggle with all the time at Knight Foundation. The output certainly is going to be kind of measured in part number of students who graduate, graduation rate in 4 years, debt upon graduation, kind of average earnings. The outcome ultimately is, are we seeing more local companies hire more local talent? Are we seeing more of the graduates choose to stay here and invest in their community, pay it forward? I argue that we have indicators that that's happening already. And I think it's going to happen even more so, more deeply, more ingrained in the coming years.
Well, can't wait to see. And our entrepreneurs, I'm sure, very excited to hopefully hire some of these local talent from FIU and Miami-Dade College. And so my Endeavor Miami is celebrating 10 years. But just for everyone to know.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Thanks to us.
Thanks to us. Happy birthday to us.
We are here because of Knight Foundation. I mean, back 10 years ago, Knight Foundation was the guarantor that brought Endeavor to Miami.
Yeah.
And you have been our main supporter for the last 10 years. And our growth has been exponential in the last 3 years post-pandemic, especially with all the influx of people moving to the city and more entrepreneurs from Latin America, but also domestic. And we produced the study, the migration study. If those of you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend it. It's on our website. But so a lot of momentum. And back in the day, it was so hard to identify where the founders were. They were siloed. Yeah. They were not really connecting. There was not capital in the city. You had to fly to Silicon Valley or New York to really raise money. And thankfully, this has changed post-pandemic. And so I'm just really glad that at Knight and you have been part of this journey with us. And what do you see for the next years? I mean, Endeavor being at the forefront of developing this entrepreneurial ecosystem here in South Florida.
It's been an absolute joy, not just being supporters, but partners, and watching Endeavor grow alongside the market and the community as a community evolved and matured. I remember I've heard the stories, and I can kind of picture the stories of my predecessor, Matt Hagman, and our president, Alberto Barguin, flying to New York to make the case as to why Endeavor should open up its first U.S. office in Miami. And I think that we did some sort of kind of, at the time, was called it a challenge grant, where we said, hey, we'll put our money down. We believe in this so much. We believe in Miami so much. And then we had an amazing group of founding board members, founding chairs, Danny Echevarria, Adriana Cisneros, who stepped up in a big way. And several founding board members who are still on our board, who have stepped up and said, no, this is going to work. I think when I think of the next kind of decade, right, I think you're going to hit an interesting kind of point of coming full circle in some ways. I think you're going to see the exit cycle take place.
Correct.
So we know who's doing well. We know kind of what's happening, and there's a good bench of companies now that are much more developed than maybe we had X years ago. And so the next 10 years, I see some really important exits happening that will be, I think, the final proof positive that Miami can develop, grow, scale, and exit meaningful businesses of consequence, of global consequence. So I think it's gonna be important for the doubters that are left about whether Miami was a trend or not. I think the numbers, the exits are going to be what really is the final nail in that coffin. And so I expect to see great exits. And then I expect to see this virtuous cycle take hold, right? So when I think of, for example, Mako and Maurice Ferre and his team there, like the companies that have spun out of Mako that today are doing phenomenally well, right? The angel investors, the companies, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that Mako was a bit ago, and it takes a while for these cycles to play out. In the next kind of decade, I expect that we'll see that same cycle happen, but multiple streams out.
That's what we.
And I think that's going to be really, really, really important, not just for the self-sufficiency and reinvestment of the community, but for our own kind of confidence and swagger. That like, hey, like this wasn't a moment. This isn't a blip in time because of Twitter. This is an authentic, present, substantive thing that's happening here. We've been on this journey for some time, and we'll be on it for a lot longer. As long as we don't lose focus, I think that we're not trying to be somebody else. We're trying to be this other region or this other thing, and we say, hey, we want to create opportunity, we want to create the best experience possible for amazing founders and founding teams. I think we'll be on a good way.
I completely agree. What you just mentioned is what we call the multiplier effect. Having those founders that scaled, had a successful exit, inspire the next generation of entrepreneurs. They become angel investors, their employees become entrepreneurs, and that's how we see ecosystems really growing, right? And then I see that a lot in Latin America, where Endeavor has been a longer time. But we're also seeing that in other states in the United States. Like I was just recently in Chicago and also in Atlanta. Like everybody's developing and doubling down on building those entrepreneurial ecosystems and tech hubs. So I'm also really, I know it's going to be, the next 10 years are going to be incredible for all of us.
Amen.
In building this entrepreneurial ecosystem together. And I really thank you again for all your support and for joining us in our podcast.
It was great.
And I hope to just continue supporting more and more entrepreneurs in this amazing community. So if you're also listening from other countries or other markets, if you have doubts about Miami, just reach out. We have so many good things to offer here. It's a great place to call home. And he's called it home since he was born.
35 years.
But thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you all.